Hey guys, before we start, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you have any feedback. Let's go to the story. Holidays have always been strange for me. Not bad, necessarily, just strange. Like I'm playing a role I never auditioned for, showing up in a sweater that doesn't quite fit, laughing on cue, filling plates, and trying not to look like I'd rather be anywhere else. And Thanksgiving? That one's the trickiest. It's the holiday that pretends to be about gratitude, but always ends up revealing exactly who's holding resentment, who's keeping score, and who's just waiting for a chance to tip the balance of the table in their favor. I learned that the hard way. Because last Thanksgiving, my sister stood up in front of the entire family and said, "We voted, and you're not family anymore." It didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, it felt like it did. But when I look back on it now, I see the lead-up, the warning signs, the quiet flickers of tension I kept trying to smother with politeness. But let me back up. I'm the oldest. 32, unmarried, no kids. I work full-time in nonprofit administration, nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills and I like what I do. My sister, Melissa, is 3 years younger and has always had a knack for performing. Not in the theater sense, though she did take drama classes in high school, but in the way she knows how to read a room and say exactly what people want to hear. She married young, had 2 kids back-to-back, and immediately became our parents' favorite story to tell. You know the kind. Melissa and David just bought a new house. Melissa is hosting this year. The boys are in private school now, did we mention? Meanwhile, I was the quiet one. The one who moved out early, didn't come home much, and never gave them the grandchild glow they were hoping for. Still, I showed up. Every year. I brought wine. I helped in the kitchen. I wrapped presents. I stayed civil. In return, I got a seat at the very edge of the table, both literally and emotionally. Last Thanksgiving, things already felt off. My mom's text about dinner was oddly formal. Arrive no later than 3 p.m. Please bring your usual. No emojis. No smiley faces. Just a list. When I walked in, the living room was full of chatter and laughter, but it died down the moment I stepped through the door. Melissa looked up from where she was arranging a tray of appetizers. "Oh," she said. "You're here." Not rude, but not welcoming either. I handed my coat to my dad, who didn't even glance at me before hanging it up. My mom gave me a quick, one-arm hug and pointed to the kitchen. "Can you warm the rolls?" Not even a hello. I brushed it off. Tried to tell myself I was imagining things. That the tension in the room was just holiday stress. That Melissa was distracted. That my parents were tired. So I did what I always do. I kept moving. I found a quiet corner in the kitchen, reheated bread, poured drinks, and made small talk with the kids. But the whole time, I felt it. Like something was coiled just beneath the surface of the day, waiting to strike. I just didn't know it would be aimed directly at me. Dinner itself felt like walking through a minefield barefoot. Every comment from my parents came with an edge. Not aggressive, just slightly off. My mom kept mentioning how some people don't understand the sacrifices of raising a family. My dad made a joke about how freedom must be nice when you don't have mouths to feed. Melissa laughed too hard. Her husband, David, avoided eye contact like his life depended on it. I tried to keep the conversation light. Asked the boys about school, complimented the stuffing, helped refill drinks. But the mood kept slipping. There was a performance happening. I just wasn't in on the script. By the time we sat down to eat, I'd resigned myself to a quiet evening. Smile, nod, excuse myself early. I'd done it before. But then, midway through dessert, Melissa cleared her throat. Everyone turned toward her like it had been rehearsed. She stood up, tapped her glass with a spoon. "I know this isn't part of the usual Thanksgiving tradition," she began, her voice syrupy sweet, "but we've been having some conversations as a family, and we feel it's time to be honest." I looked around the table. My parents weren't confused. They weren't surprised. They were ready. Melissa continued. "For years, we've all tried to make this work. To include everyone. To support choices, even when they don't align with our values." She glanced at me then. Just a flick of her eyes. "And we've decided that we're done pretending." The room went dead silent. I thought maybe she was about to say she and David were moving. They were changing holiday traditions. That they'd no longer be hosting. But that's not what she said. She said, "We voted, and you're not family anymore." There it was. Clean. Cold. Delivered like a verdict. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Melissa looked at me like she'd just done me a favor. My mom reached for her wine. My dad nodded like something had finally been settled. No one said a word in protest. And I sat there, still holding my fork, wondering how the hell this had become my reality. They had voted. Voted. As if connection was something you could lose in a democratic process. As if belonging was a prize, and I'd failed to qualify. Melissa kept going. This isn't personal, it's about boundaries. We can't keep bending to accommodate someone who doesn't want what we value. My sister's voice was calm, almost rehearsed, as if this was her closing argument in a debate competition. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just eliminated me. My mom didn't look at me. My dad stared down at his plate. I realized, in that moment, that this wasn't new. This wasn't a sudden break. This had been years in the making. And now, they were just saying it out loud. I stood up. Slowly. Quietly. I didn't yell. I didn't demand an explanation. I just pushed in my chair, walked to the coat rack, and left. No one followed. No one called my name. Not even the kids asked where I was going. Because they already knew. Walking out of that house was like surfacing from deep underwater. Everything was too quiet. Too still. The wind hit harder than I expected. My coat was thin, but I didn't feel cold. I got into my car without thinking, turned the engine over, and sat there for a minute, staring at the steering wheel. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even angry. I was just hollow. Like the part of me that still wanted to believe in the idea of family had quietly stepped out of the room, leaving the rest of me behind. I didn't drive straight home. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and sat under the fluorescent glow of a street lamp, watching a young couple load pie and sparkling cider into their trunk. They were laughing, probably heading to their own Thanksgiving somewhere, maybe a little late, maybe with their awkward family dynamics. But I knew one thing for sure. No one at their table had been voted out. No one at their table had been stripped of their last name in the middle of dessert. I sat there for over an hour, letting that reality settle into me. They had planned it. That wasn't spontaneous. That wasn't heat of the moment. Melissa's speech was too smooth. My parents' reactions were too controlled. They discussed this, decided it, waited for the right time, and they'd chosen a holiday about gratitude to cast me out. I went home that night and didn't speak a word, didn't answer texts, didn't post online. I just locked the door behind me and stood in the living room, staring at my couch like I didn't know how to sit on it anymore. Eventually, I peeled off my coat and shoes, curled up on one end, and let my body settle into stillness. Not sleep, not rest, just still. I didn't know what to do next. Do you send a message? Demand an explanation? Do you write a response, a rebuttal, something to make them see what they've done? Or do you accept it? Let the silence speak for itself? I wanted to believe this was just Melissa, that maybe she had manipulated the situation, twisted our parents into seeing me as a threat, or a disappointment, or a burden. But I couldn't lie to myself anymore, because I saw their faces. They weren't reluctant. They weren't conflicted. They were relieved. Relieved to be done with me. A few days passed. I didn't hear from anyone. Not my parents. Not Melissa. Not even the kids. The silence was complete. And in its fullness, I understood something I'd always tried to ignore. I had never really been part of them. I'd been tolerated, included when it was convenient, invited out of obligation, not affection. And when do I stop performing? When I stopped fitting the shape they needed me to be. They cut me loose. Not with cruelty, but with precision. And now, I had to decide what to do with the freedom they left behind. I didn't tell many people what had happened. Not at first. It felt too surreal, too theatrical to say out loud. How do you even begin a sentence like that? So, my sister publicly excommunicated me over pie. Even thinking about it made me feel like I was overreacting. Like maybe I'd misread the situation. Maybe I'd misunderstood the tone, or maybe they didn't mean it that way. But every time I replayed the moment, the same truth echoed back. They meant it, and they didn't take it back. Not the next day, not the next week. No texts, no calls, no breadcrumb apology wrapped in passive-aggressive concern. Just silence. So I decided not to fill it. I didn't reach out. I let the silence grow until it stopped feeling like absence and started feeling like space. That space gave me time to think. Not just about them, but about me. About who I'd been in that family system. Because the truth was, I'd always been the outsider. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I'd never been interested in performing. I wasn't competitive. I didn't brag. I didn't fake enthusiasm for things I didn't care about. And in a family that thrived on appearances, on being the best and the brightest, that made me the weak link. Not rebellious. Just inconvenient. Inconvenient people get erased. Melissa had always played the part perfectly. Her house was always spotless. Her kids always matched. Her Instagram was curated like a marketing campaign. She was everything they could point to at dinner parties and say, "Look how well we did." And me? I was reminded that not everything turns out glossy. That love isn't always reflected in career milestones or wedding photos. That some people grow into themselves quietly, without fanfare. And that was unacceptable. The first person I told was a coworker. We were sitting in the break room, microwaving leftovers, when she asked how my Thanksgiving had gone. I paused, then said, "I think my family broke up with me." She blinked. "Wait, what?" So I told her. Not the whole story. Just the basics. The announcement. The walkout. The aftermath. And to my surprise, she didn't laugh. She didn't look horrified or confused. She just nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, mine pulled something like that over Christmas once." That opened a door. Not just to vent, but to recognize something bigger. That I wasn't alone. That families fractured. That sometimes, the people who raise you are the same ones who harm you the most gently. So gently you almost don't notice until the wound won't close. That realization didn't make the pain go away, but it did make it make sense. It made space for a new version of truth, one where I didn't need to contort myself to earn love that came with terms and expiration dates. So, I began rebuilding. Not a dramatic reinvention. Not some Phoenix Rising moment. Just small things. I redecorated my apartment, not because it needed it, but because I wanted it to feel like mine. I started saying no to things that drained me. I reached out to people who had shown up consistently, even when I hadn't noticed. And most importantly, I stopped explaining myself. To them. To others. To myself. Because sometimes, the people who demand the most justification are the ones who never really listened in the first place. The thing no one tells you about losing your family is that it doesn't feel like a dramatic explosion. It feels like a slow fade out. You expect it to hit like grief, like heartbreak, like screaming into the void. But it doesn't. It's quieter than that. It's standing in your kitchen on a Sunday, realizing no one's going to ask if you're coming over next weekend. It's deleting a group chat that hasn't buzzed in weeks. It's seeing a photo tagged with everyone but you. And then you sit with it. Not as a tragedy. Not as a mistake. But as confirmation. That sometimes, walking away is what sets you free, even if you didn't make the first move. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, I got a card in the mail. No return address. No message inside. Just a generic holiday card with a glittery tree and a typed name at the bottom, from the Williamson family. Not Mom and Dad. Not Melissa and David. Just a label. It didn't feel like an olive branch. It felt like a statement. Like they were saying, "We're still a family. You're just not part of it." I threw it out. Not angrily. Not dramatically. I just didn't need it. Because it didn't mean what they thought it did. It wasn't proof of connection. It was proof of branding. And I wasn't interested in being someone's reputation maintenance anymore. I spent that Christmas with friends. We cooked too much food, watched old movies, and stayed up late playing cards. Someone brought homemade mulled wine, and we all sat around in pajamas, talking about nothing and everything. There was no performance. No eggshells. No one is trying to outshine the others. It was messy, a little loud, completely uncoordinated, and it was the most at home I'd felt in years. That night, curled up on the couch, I realized something strange. I didn't miss them. Not really. I missed the idea of them. The idea of what family should have been. But the reality? That had been weighing me down for a long, long time. And now that it was gone, I wasn't empty. I was lighter. That winter, I started saying yes to more things. A friend's birthday trip. A cooking class I've been eyeing for months. Late-night conversations that didn't revolve around problem-solving or walking on emotional glass. And in those moments, I stopped feeling like I was replacing anything. I wasn't patching holes. I was building something new. Something real. And it wasn't perfect. But it didn't need to be. Because it was mine. And it didn't ask me to be anyone but myself. The new year came and went without a single word from them. No text. No call. No passive-aggressive post online meant to bait a reaction. Just a stretch of silence that felt, oddly, like peace. I used to think closure required some grand confrontation, tears, truths, maybe even forgiveness. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe closure is just the decision to stop reopening a door that only ever led to the same room. Maybe it's not dramatic. Maybe it's quiet. Just a moment where you realize the need for explanation is gone. And in its place is stillness. One afternoon in March, I bumped into someone who knew my family. A friend of my mom's from her book club days. I hadn't seen her in years. She recognized me at the farmer's market and waved me over. We did the usual pleasantries. How's work? Still in the city? The weather's been strange, hasn't it? Then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, she said, I heard things got a little tense at Thanksgiving. Tense. That word landed differently. I smiled, not out of agreement, but because I'd finally learned how to hold my ground without turning it into a battlefield. Yeah, I said. It's better now, though. She tilted her head. So you all made up? I shook mine gently. No. I just stopped pretending it was ever working. She didn't know what to say to that. And I didn't need her to. Because that sentence, that truth, wasn't for her. It was for me. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes from finally accepting what people are capable of. Not just their mistakes, but their limits. My family had shown me theirs. They had drawn a line in the sand and stood on the other side, arms crossed, waiting for me to apologize for making them draw it. But I hadn't crossed it. And I wouldn't. Because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I wasn't a disappointment. I just didn't fit their mold. And trying to contort myself into something smaller, something quieter, easier, more acceptable, had nearly broken me. But I was done shrinking, done performing, done waiting to be loved correctly by people who had decided they couldn't or wouldn't do it. I started therapy again. Not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to understand the pieces I had picked up. In those sessions, I stopped using the phrase, they hurt me, like it was an accusation. I started saying it like it was a fact. Something that happened. Something real. But not something I had to carry forever. That shift, just that small change in tone, opened something in me. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. But freedom. And with it came the kind of peace you don't have to earn. You just have to stop giving it away. Spring came slowly that year, like even the weather wasn't sure what to do with itself. One day, it was sun and blossoms. The next, it was wind and gray. But eventually, things warmed. And so did I. Not in a dramatic way. There was no big revelation, no cinematic breakthrough. Just small things. Morning walks without headphones. Coffee in silence. Saying yes when I meant it and no when I needed to. And most importantly, not looking over my shoulder. Not expecting them to come back. Not wondering if I should be the one to reach out. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything. I was living. It took almost a full year before I got another message. Melissa sent it. No subject line. Just 2 sentences. Hope you're well. Just wanted to check in. No mention of what had happened. No reference to that night. Just a ghost of a gesture. And maybe, once upon a time, that would have cracked something open in me. Maybe I would have seen it as an opportunity. A starting point. A sign that the door could be opened again. But not this time. Because I finally understood something simple and life-changing. Not everyone who wants access deserves it. Some bridges aren't burned. They're closed for maintenance. And sometimes, you realize they were never sturdy to begin with. I didn't reply. Not out of spite. Not out of anger. But because I didn't need to. She had said what she needed to say. And so had I, when I stood up from that Thanksgiving table and chose myself. It had taken years to get there. Years of silence, of second-guessing, of pretending not to notice the way I disappeared in rooms I used to belong in. But now? Now, I don't shrink anymore. I don't edit myself to be more palatable. I don't translate my worth into something they can understand. Because I've built something bigger than their approval. A life. With people who show up. With laughter that isn't laced with judgment. With holidays that don't feel like auditions. Sometimes, people ask me what I'd do if my family apologized. If they called. If they cried. If they said all the right things. And I always tell them the truth. That I'd listen. Because I'm not bitter. I'm not closed off. But listening doesn't mean returning. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. And healing doesn't require reopening the wound. I made peace. Not because they deserved it. But because I did. And if I've learned anything from this past year, it's that real family doesn't vote you out. They fight to keep you close. Even when it's messy. Even when you disagree. Even when it's hard. And if they don't, then maybe they were never really family to begin with.